Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cold Podcast, the only podcast that exists, and it only happens when I have a cold.
When you want a hot meal without a big deal, what are you gonna pick?
Jake's podcast.
When a hungry bunch shows up for lunch, what are you gonna pick?
Jake's podcast. Hello. Thank you so much for tuning in. It means a lot to me. The day is August 24th, 2017, and this is episode 1 of the Cold Podcast, a podcast by Jake Arlo, on days only when I have a cold. Today we have some really exciting programming lined up. In Act 1, yeah, that's like American Life. I'll have 3 acts and they'll all be progressively worse, and you're not going to want to listen to them, and my voice sounds bad. So, in Act 1, it'll be a story about the things I've done while I've had a cold. And then in Act 2, it'll be a story of the medicines I've taken. And then in Act 3, it'll be just a reflection on life. Thank you, and I hope you listen. Act 1, the things I've done while I've had a cold. Cold day 1. I bike to work, and I know that sounds really sonically pleasing. I biked to work, and then when I got to work, my boss overheard me telling my coworkers that I had a cold. My boss pulled me aside and said, "If you have a cold, you really shouldn't be here because you work with children." I said, "Yeah, that makes sense." And so she drove me home. That was very nice of her. And then, so during that day, I, what did I do? Let's see. I tried to read Fahrenheit 451 for about 5 minutes, and then I fell asleep for 4 hours. Then I woke up and I had a fever, and I started watching Heather's the Musical bootleg on YouTube that I've watched a lot of times before. Oh, and before that, I also fell asleep while I was watching The Sound of Music. And then I woke up and Rolf was betraying them. And then I was watching Heather's the Musical, and I remember that I wanted to watch Falsettos on Broadway, the musical. I only like watching musicals while I'm sick, apparently, and so I bought Falsettos the musical, and I watched it, and it was very, very good, and I cried. And then the next day I watched Falsettos 2 times, because when I'm sick I only like to watch musicals, and the same ones are good. And then I went to bed, and then I watched Falsettos twice today, and but also I watched Oh Hello, the play, on Broadway, but on Netflix, and I enjoyed it, and I laughed. That has been Act 1, what I did while I was sick. Thank you. Act 2, the medicines I've taken. Well, the night before I got my cold, I had a sore throat, so I didn't do anything because I didn't have any medicine that was pertinent for that, and I didn't really have a cold or a fever or anything like that yet. Then on the day that I was sent home from work, I took Dayquil in the morning, but it wasn't enough. And then when I went home, I took Dayquil again. Then before bed, I took Dayquil, and that knocked me out like a mother, who was gently rubbing my back. But it was Dayquil. And then this morning, I took Dayquil, and probably within the next hour, I'll take Dayquil. Once I do that, I'm going to start slurring my words, so it would be a good idea to do a podcast, because if I slur my words and my nose is clogged and I'm sniffling, no one will want to listen. And that has been Act 2, medicines I've taken. Hello everybody, this is Act 3, reflections on life. And isn't it funny that when you're young and healthy, you're like, and then when you're old and you're not as healthy, you're like, oh. That's been Act 3, Reflections on Life. Thank you very much for tuning into my podcast, The Cold Podcast by Jake Arlo, a podcast for only when I have a cold. So I don't know when the next episode will be, and hopefully not soon. It will be next time I have a cold. Thank you to NyQuil for sponsoring this episode. And by sponsoring, I mean I'm gonna drink NyQuil straight from the jar after this episode's done. Thank you, and have a good night. Bye bye.